September 17th, 1944. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Lieutenant Klaus Richter stands beside a field table studying a map by lantern light, trying to understand how his entire division disappeared. The map shows their position clearly, kilometer square 4729. Grid coordinates placing them 8 kilometers inside Belgium, safely behind German defensive lines. But the radio intercepts his signals unit, captured 3 hours ago, tell a different story. Allied intelligence believes the 312th Infantry Division is 22 kilometers east, deep inside Germany, no threat to the advancing American Third Army. Richter traces the roads on his map with one finger. Every landmark matches the terrain. The village of Rochefort, 5 kilometers north. The Lam River, 3 kilometers west. The elevation contours perfectly align with the ridgeline visible outside his tent. According to every navigational principle Richter learned at Wehrmacht officer school, his division occupies a blocking position directly in the path of American General Patton's advance. They are positioned to ambush American armor as it pushes through the Ardennes. A division of 8,000 men with artillery and anti-tank guns hidden in forest terrain, waiting to savage American columns. Except Allied commanders are routing their advance through this exact area because they believe it's undefended. Richter holds 2 documents: a captured American operations map showing the 312th Division's position far to the east, and his own Wehrmacht tactical map showing their actual position. Both maps cannot be correct, yet both appear accurate. Allied reconnaissance aircraft have flown over this area 17 times in the past 4 days. They've photographed everything. Somehow, they see empty forest where 8,000 German soldiers are dug in. The Americans are walking into an ambush tomorrow morning at 0600 hours. 4 tank battalions, approximately 160 Sherman tanks, advancing in column formation through the narrow forest roads. German anti-tank guns are sighted to create a kill zone 3 kilometers long. American casualties could exceed 2,000 men in the first hour. Or the Germans are about to watch Allied armor drive past their positions unchallenged because something has gone catastrophically wrong with Wehrmacht navigation and map distribution. Richter doesn't know which scenario terrifies him more. What neither Richter nor American commanders understand is that both maps are telling the truth. The Germans really are where their maps show. The Allies really are seeing empty forest in reconnaissance photos. Both realities exist simultaneously because a 51-year-old Belgian cartographer named Emil Fournier spent the last 11 months creating the most sophisticated deception operation of the war. He didn't use camouflage or dummy positions. He used something more fundamental than concealment. He changed the maps themselves, not by drawing false information, but by subtly shifting every landmark, every road intersection, every elevation marker by distances small enough to appear like normal cartographic variants, large enough to make an entire German division disappear into geographic limbo. The technique requires no technology, no special materials, just cartographic expertise and access to German map printing facilities. Fournier has both. He's worked for Institut Cartographique Militaire, the Belgian military mapping agency, since 1921. When the Germans occupied Belgium in 1940, they commandeered the institute. They needed local cartographers who knew Belgian terrain to produce tactical maps for Wehrmacht units. The Germans kept the Belgian staff working, supervised by German officers, but dependent on Belgian technical expertise. For 4 years, Fournier printed accurate maps under German supervision. For 11 months, he's been printing maps that are accurate enough to pass inspection, wrong enough to create impossible situations. The Germans can navigate locally using their maps. Roads and villages appear where predicted. But strategic positioning becomes unreliable. Units believe they're in one location while actually occupying another. The shifts are small, 2 to 4 kilometers typically, but in military operations where coordination depends on precise positioning, 2 kilometers might as well be 200. The 312th Division is Fournier's masterpiece. Every map issued to that unit contains systematic shifts calibrated to place them geographically 22 kilometers east of their actual position. The division navigated to their current location using maps that showed correct local detail but systematically distorted large-scale positioning. They believe they're blocking American routes into Germany. They're actually positioned in an area Allied intelligence considers empty. Tomorrow morning, American tanks will advance through terrain their maps show as undefended. German forces will hold fire because their maps indicate the Americans are nowhere near their position. Both sides will be correct according to their charts. Both sides will be confused when reality doesn't match expectations. Fournier created this paradox by understanding that maps aren't territory. Maps are abstractions, representations filtered through the cartographer's choices about what to include, what to emphasize, how to depict relationships between features. Change those choices subtly, and you change how people perceive reality. Richter stares at his map, a knot forming in his stomach. Something is wrong. He feels it in the certainty with which Allied aircraft ignore his division's position. He sees it in the casual way American radio traffic discusses moving through this area. Either the Americans are setting an elaborate trap, or German maps have become unreliable. Neither possibility appears in Wehrmacht doctrine. Understanding Emil Fournier's technique requires understanding how military maps are made. The process begins with survey data, precise measurements of terrain features, elevations, distances between landmarks. Surveyors establish control points, locations with known coordinates that serve as reference anchors. From these control points, cartographers build outward, mapping roads, rivers, forests, villages in relation to the surveyed framework. The critical vulnerability lies in the control points themselves. If those shift, everything built from them shifts proportionally. Fournier realized this in November 1943 while supervising production of tactical maps for Wehrmacht operations in the Ardennes. German officers brought survey data from Reichsamt für Landesaufnahme, the German national mapping agency, expecting Fournier's institute to produce tactical overlays compatible with German strategic maps. Fournier examined the German control points and noticed something interesting. They didn't quite match Belgian survey data. The differences were small, typical of different survey methodologies and datum choices. German maps used Potsdam datum, a coordinate system centered on measurements made in Potsdam, Germany. Belgian maps used Brussels datum, centered on Belgian survey points. Converting between the two systems required mathematical transformations. Most cartographers used standard conversion formulas published in geodetic references. Fournier realized he could modify those transformations. Instead of converting coordinates accurately, he could introduce systematic errors. Small rotations, subtle scale changes, incremental shifts that would place features slightly wrong on the final maps. The errors would be too small to notice when navigating locally. A village appears where expected. A road intersection matches the terrain. But accumulated across distances, the errors would compound. Travel 20 kilometers using Fournier's modified maps and you'd end up 2 or 3 kilometers from where you believed. The genius lay in making the errors appear natural. Cartographic practice includes acceptable tolerances for feature placement. A village might be located within 50 meters of its actual position, considered acceptable for tactical maps at 1 to 50,000 scale. Fournier kept his modifications within these tolerances for individual features while systematically biasing all shifts in the same direction. The cumulative effect created geographic displacement invisible to inspection. Testing the concept terrified him. In December 1943, he modified maps for a Wehrmacht supply depot in Namur. He shifted all control points 200 meters northwest, propagating that shift through every feature on the map. The depot commander used the maps to direct supply convoys, Drivers found the depot without difficulty because local roads were depicted correctly. But when Wehrmacht logistics officers tried to coordinate the depot's position with artillery units using different map editions, they discovered a discrepancy. The depot appeared in slightly different locations on different maps. German officers attributed this to cartographic error, normal variance in mapping production. They never suspected deliberate manipulation. They requested corrected maps from Fournier's institute. Fournier provided new additions with consistent control point shifts, effectively standardizing the error. From that moment, all Wehrmacht maps of Namur contained Fournier's modifications. The city existed in two coordinate systems simultaneously. The real geographic position and the mapped position all German forces used. Fournier expanded the technique through spring 1944. Each map edition introduced subtle shifts. German units navigating Belgium increasingly relied on cartographic fiction, carefully constructed to be plausible, systematic enough to create strategic effects. By September, when the Allies began pushing through Belgium toward Germany, Fournier had modified approximately 40% of Wehrmacht tactical maps covering the Ardennes region. The 312th Division received their maps in late August 1944. The division was being moved from coastal defense positions in northern France to blocking positions in the Ardennes. They needed updated maps showing defensive terrain suitable for delaying Allied advances. Fournier's institute provided comprehensive map sets showing excellent defensive positions along the Belgian-German border, strong terrain for ambush operations, natural choke points for channeling American armor. The division commander, General Friedrich Hochstein, studied the maps and selected positions that appeared ideal. Forested ridges overlooking narrow valleys, river crossings with limited approaches, villages that could be fortified. His staff planned the movement carefully. The division would march southeast from their staging area, following roads depicted clearly on their maps, occupying positions that would put them directly athwart American supply routes. The march took 4 days. Hochstein's forces navigated using their maps, reaching positions that matched cartographic predictions perfectly. Local villages appeared where expected. Rivers crossed at mapped ford locations. Forest tracks led to defensive positions with good fields of fire. Every tactical detail was accurate. The strategic positioning was shifted 22 kilometers east of actual geography. Hochstein believed his division occupied grid squares 5300 through 5320 along the Belgian-German border. They actually occupied grid squares 4700 through 4720, deep inside Belgian territory, nowhere near the border. The discrepancy remained invisible because everyone in the division used the same modified maps. Their shared cartographic reality became more powerful than geographic truth. Allied intelligence had accurate maps. American forces used maps produced by Army Map Service based on pre-war Belgian and French survey data. When American reconnaissance photographed the Ardennes, they compared images against accurate coordinates. They saw German positions in the areas where Germans actually were, which didn't match where German radio traffic claimed to be. Allied intelligence concluded the Germans were conducting radio deception, pretending to occupy positions far from their actual locations. This created a bizarre situation where both sides possessed accurate information but couldn't reconcile it. Germans knew their positions according to their maps. Allies knew German positions according to geography. Neither side could understand the other's perspective because they operated in different cartographic realities. By mid-September, the contradiction approached crisis. American Third Army planned an offensive thrust through the Ardennes, aiming to break through to the Rhine River. Intelligence indicated German forces were concentrated along the border, leaving the Ardennes lightly defended. Third Army Commander General Walton Walker ordered tank columns to advance rapidly through what appeared to be empty territory, bypassing German strongpoints rather than reducing them systematically. The advance route ran directly through terrain occupied by Hochstein's 312th Division, but American maps showed that terrain as undefended. German maps showed Allied forces advancing well south of their positions. The stage was set for an accidental battle, where both sides would be surprised to discover the other's presence. Lieutenant Richter pieces this together gradually on the night of September 17th. His Signals Intelligence Unit intercepted American radio traffic discussing tomorrow's advance. The coordinates Americans cited made no sense. They referred to roads and villages Richter recognized, but placed them kilometers from where his maps indicated. Either American maps were wrong, which seemed unlikely given their general accuracy, or German maps contained systematic errors. Richter requisitioned maps from neighboring units. He compared control points, checking whether different map editions agreed on coordinates for the same features. They didn't. A church steeple in Rochefort appeared at different coordinates on 3 different map sheets. The variations were small, within normal tolerances, but they formed a pattern. All shifts moved features consistently eastward by amounts ranging from 1 to 4 kilometers. Someone had manipulated Wehrmacht maps. The realization hit Richter like artillery concussion. Every position they'd occupied, every coordinate they'd reported, every tactical plan they'd made, all based on cartographic fiction. The division wasn't where they believed. Richter had no idea where they actually were because correcting the maps required knowing the original errors. And those errors were systematically embedded in every chart. At 0200 hours, Richter brought his findings to General Hochstein. The general's initial reaction was dismissal. Maps couldn't be wrong. Wehrmacht cartography was precise, tested, reliable. Richter laid out 3 map editions showing the same church at 3 different locations. He showed American intercepts placing German units at coordinates that appeared empty on Wehrmacht maps. He demonstrated that every assumption about the division's strategic position depended on trusting maps that contained detectable errors. Hochstein studied the evidence for 20 minutes without speaking. Finally, he asked the critical question: if our maps are wrong, where are we actually located? Richter had no answer. Determining their true position required surveying from known, accurate control points. That would take days. The American offensive began in 4 hours. Emil Fournier learns about the crisis at 0330 hours. A courier from the Belgian resistance arrives at his apartment in Brussels with an urgent message. German units in the Ardennes are discovering map discrepancies. Wehrmacht cartographic officers have begun investigating. Fournier's modifications are about to be exposed. The courier, a young woman named Sophie Laurent, delivers the message breathlessly. They know something is wrong with the maps. German officers are comparing different editions, finding inconsistencies. They're requesting Belgian survey data to verify control points. If they cross-reference Belgian and German surveys, they'll detect your modifications within hours. Fournier expected this eventually. Sustaining the deception indefinitely was impossible. He hoped to maintain it through the Allied offensive, creating enough confusion to give American forces an advantage. But the timeline has collapsed. Germans are investigating now, hours before the American advance. Sophie asks what he'll do. Fournier considers his options. He can destroy evidence, burn his notebooks containing the modification calculations, eliminate proof of deliberate manipulation. The Germans might conclude the errors were accidental, normal cartographic variants. Or he can accelerate the chaos, push the deception to breaking point, create maximum confusion during the critical hours when American tanks are moving. He chooses acceleration. For 11 months, Fournier maintained plausibility, keeping modifications subtle enough to escape detection. Now he abandons subtlety. He pulls out map plates for the Ardennes region, the master templates used to print tactical maps. Working quickly, he modifies control points drastically, shifting them 5 to 8 kilometers, rotating entire grid sections, introducing distortions that will make navigation impossible. Sophie watches confused. Won't that expose everything? They'll know maps were sabotaged. Exactly, Fournier replies, but not until they've printed and distributed these editions. By then, no German unit will trust any map. They'll have to navigate by terrain recognition alone, without coordinate certainty. That will slow their movements, disrupt coordination, create paralysis during the American offensive. How do you get Germans to print and distribute corrupted maps? Sophie asks. Fournier smiles grimly. I tell them these are corrected editions, fixing the errors they discovered. They'll rush these into production, desperate to restore navigational reliability. By the time they realize these maps are worse, it will be too late. At 0400 hours, Fournier arrives at Institut Cartographic Militaire. The building is dark, except for the guard station. A Wehrmacht corporal stops him. Herr Fournier, why are you here at this hour? Emergency map corrections, Fournier explains. We've discovered coordinate errors in recent editions. General Hochstein's division reported discrepancies. I need to prepare corrected plates immediately. The corporal knows Hochstein's name, knows the 312th Division is operationally deployed. If their maps are wrong, that's a crisis. He lets Fournier pass. The Institute's printing facility occupies the basement, heavy machinery for producing thousands of map copies. Fournier loads his modified plates into the lithographic press. He runs test prints, verifying that the new control point shifts reproduce clearly. Everything looks correct unless someone compares these maps against actual terrain. He prints 500 copies per plate, producing tactical maps for the entire Ardennes sector. Each map contains catastrophic coordinate distortions. Villages appear kilometers from actual locations. Road networks show connections that don't exist. Elevation contours suggest terrain features that aren't present. Any unit attempting to navigate using these maps will become hopelessly lost within hours. By 0530 hours, Fournier has 2,000 maps printed and bundled for distribution. He labels them Ausgabe für Revision A, Edition 4, Revision A, marking them as urgent corrections to previously distributed editions. Wehrmacht logistics will prioritize distributing them to units that reported discrepancies, meaning Hochstein's division will receive copies immediately. The irony is perfect. Germans discovered their maps were wrong. Fournier is providing corrected editions that are catastrophically wronger. The deception has shifted from subtle strategic displacement to tactical annihilation of Wehrmacht navigational capability. Fournier places the bundled maps in distribution crates, addressed to Wehrmacht logistics depots. He leaves them in the Institute's shipping area, where morning couriers will collect them. Then he walks out of the building for the last time. He cannot return. When Germans realize what he's done, they'll hunt him. He's made arrangements with the Belgian resistance. Sophie is waiting 3 blocks away with false identity papers and directions to a safe house. As Fournier walks through pre-dawn Brussels, he thinks about maps and truth. For 11 months, he exploited the fact that maps are believed because they're maps. Authority derives from the medium itself. A printed chart with professional cartographic symbols carries implicit reliability. People trust maps because doubting them means doubting the possibility of navigation, of knowing where you are. Fournier weaponized that trust. The American offensive begins at 0600 hours, September 18th, 1944. Lead elements of the 4th Armored Division advance into the Ardennes along routes their maps show as undefended. Tank crews are relaxed, expecting minimal resistance. They're conducting an exploitation, pushing through empty territory to reach strategic objectives beyond. At 0617 hours, American Sherman tanks driving through a forest valley take anti-tank fire from concealed German positions. 3 tanks explode in rapid succession. The remaining tanks halt, confused. According to their maps, no German forces occupy this area. According to Wehrmacht maps, no American forces are advancing here. Both sides are equally surprised. Hochstein's division faces a tactical nightmare. American armor is attacking from a direction their maps show as impossible. The division's pre-planned artillery targets are based on map coordinates that don't align with where Americans actually are. Fire missions calculated overnight are useless because the maps used for calculation are wrong. German artillery crews try to adjust fire based on observation, but their forward observers report targets at coordinates that don't exist on available maps. American commanders face similar confusion. They're taking fire from positions their maps show as empty forest. When they request artillery support, fire direction calculations place German positions in locations where nothing is visible. The entire battle devolves into close-range fighting where maps become irrelevant and soldiers navigate by what they see directly. At 0700 hours, Wehrmacht headquarters receives Fournier's edition 4 Revision A maps and distributes them to Hochstein's division. Staff officers, grateful for corrected charts, immediately begin recalculating positions and fire missions. Within 20 minutes, they realize the new maps are worse than the originals. Villages appear in locations where actual reconnaissance shows open fields. Roads depicted on the charts don't exist. Control points are shifted so far that the maps are effectively fictional. A Wehrmacht major stares at Fournier's corrupted maps and understands finally what happened. These aren't errors. This is sabotage. Someone deliberately destroyed Wehrmacht cartographic capability. He reports to Hochstein that the division has no reliable maps. Every edition they possess contains systematic falsification. Navigation must rely on terrain recognition and captured Allied maps. The chaos Fournier created reaches full intensity by 0800 hours. German units across the Ardennes discover their maps are unreliable. Attempts to coordinate between units fail because units report positions using coordinate systems that don't align. Artillery support becomes impossible because fire direction requires accurate maps. German tactical doctrine depends on precise navigation and coordinate-based communication. Fournier destroyed the foundation that doctrine rests on. American forces initially suffer from the confusion too. They encounter German positions where none should exist, take casualties from unexpected fire. But American doctrine emphasizes flexibility and improvisation. Tank commanders adapt quickly, maneuvering based on observed enemy positions rather than map predictions. American artillery uses direct observation for targeting. Within hours, American units function effectively without depending on perfect cartographic information. German forces cannot adapt as easily. Wehrmacht doctrine is systematic, planned, dependent on precise coordination. Destroying map reliability destroyed German operational capability more comprehensively than destroying ammunition depots or fuel supplies. An army that cannot navigate, cannot mass forces at decisive points, cannot coordinate combined arms operations. Hochstein's division fragments into isolated battalion-sized groups fighting independently, each uncertain of their position relative to other units. By noon on September 18th, American 4th Armored Division advances 12 kilometers through terrain the Germans expected to hold for days. German resistance is fierce locally but uncoordinated strategically. Units fight hard but fail to support each other because they cannot determine where support is needed. The 312th Division suffers catastrophic losses, not because American firepower overwhelms them, but because they cannot maneuver effectively without maps. Hochstein orders a fighting withdrawal at 1500 hours. His division has lost coherence. Units are scattered across terrain nobody can map reliably. Continuing to hold positions invites encirclement and destruction. The withdrawal becomes a rout. Units moving without accurate maps blunder into American positions, take fire from unexpected directions, lose contact with each other. By nightfall, September 18th, the 312th Division has ceased to exist as a functional formation. Of 8,000 men who began the day in prepared positions, approximately 3,000 remain in organized groups. The rest are casualties, prisoners, or scattered individuals trying to navigate west toward German lines using intuition rather than maps. American intelligence estimates German losses in the Ardennes on September 18th at 5,000 casualties. Actual German casualties are lower, around 2,000 killed or wounded. The remaining 3,000 losses are navigational casualties, men who became separated from their units and lost without reliable maps. Many eventually reached German lines over subsequent days. Others are captured. Some remain lost in the forest for weeks. The strategic impact exceeds the tactical destruction. Wehrmacht forces across the Ardennes learn that their maps cannot be trusted. This knowledge creates paralysis. Units hesitate to maneuver because movement without navigation is suicide. German commanders request new maps from Reich authorities. The cartographic backlog means new maps won't arrive for weeks. German defensive operations in Belgium become static, reactive, unable to conduct mobile defense because mobility requires navigation, and navigation requires maps. Emil Fournier reaches a resistance safe house in rural Wallonia on September 19th. Sophie brings him news of the battle, reports from resistance observers who watched German units disintegrate. American forces advancing rapidly. German casualties heavy, but German confusion heavier. Wehrmacht units fighting bravely but blind, unable to coordinate, reduced to small unit actions. Fournier feels no triumph, only exhaustion. He spent 30 years creating maps meant to help people navigate. The last 11 months he inverted that purpose. Creating maps to disorient, to confuse, to render an army helpless. The cartographer's ultimate power, he realizes, is not showing people where things are, but controlling what people believe about where things are. Change that belief systematically, and you change reality more effectively than any weapon. Sophie asks if it was worth the risk. Fournier thinks about his son, killed in 1940 during the German invasion. He thinks about 4 years of occupation, watching Germans use Belgian expertise for conquest. He thinks about 8,000 German soldiers rendered ineffective not by killing them but by making them lost. Yes, he says quietly, maps are how we understand the world. If you can change someone's map, you change their world. I changed the Wehrmacht's map of Belgium. For a few critical days, their world became somewhere they couldn't navigate. Sometimes that's enough. The Institut Cartographic Militaire is raided by Gestapo on September 21st. They find Fournier's workspace, his calculation notebooks, evidence of systematic map modification spanning 11 months. The investigation determines that approximately 40% of Wehrmacht tactical maps for Belgium and Luxembourg contain deliberate distortions. The German command orders immediate replacement of all suspect map editions. The replacement effort takes 6 weeks. Emil Fournier is never captured. He remains in hiding through the winter of 1944 as Allied forces push German armies back toward the Rhine. Belgium is liberated by February 1945. Fournier returns to Brussels in March, resuming work at the Institute, now producing maps for Belgian reconstruction efforts. He never discusses his wartime activities publicly. A few resistance members know. Allied intelligence learns of the operation in post-war investigations and classifies the reports. The story remains obscure for decades. The cartographic technique Fournier developed, systematic coordinate distortion concealed within normal cartographic variants, was never repeated operationally. Post-war military mapping adopted rigorous verification procedures, making such manipulation detectable. But the principle remains valid. Maps are human constructions, representations shaped by choices about what to depict and how to depict it. Change those choices and you change how people perceive territory. In war, perception shapes action. Fournier proved that cartographic manipulation could achieve strategic effects comparable to kinetic operations, not by destroying enemy forces, but by destroying their ability to understand where they were. The 312th Infantry Division was reconstituted in October 1944 with replacement troops. It fought in the Ardennes again during the Battle of the Bulge in December, but never recovered its effectiveness. Veterans of the September battle called it the Lost Division, a name reflecting not their combat performance, but the disorientation they experienced when maps became unreliable. Military historians studying the battle focus on casualties and ground lost. Few recognize that the decisive factor was cartographic. One Belgian cartographer transforming 8,000 German soldiers into men who could fight but couldn't navigate, who held terrain without knowing precisely where that terrain existed, who became strategically irrelevant not through defeat but through confusion.